tell you the amount of harm that it causes in criminal cases, in political cases, and just in regular cases, when people treat interrogations like it's some kind of drug dialing session where they just get everything off their chest in the hopes that maybe if they say something that sounds good, that the cops will decide that they're not going to file charges against them. It just doesn't work that way. You can't talk your way out of an arrest, and especially in a political context. If a cop has decided that they want to bring you in, then that's what they're going to do, and you're not going to be able to try to convince them otherwise. And another thing is that cops aren't always the smartest people. I think we all know that, but this is a situation that you can't outsmart them in. Cops are highly trained in the field of investigations. They know all about the different psychological traps that people can fall into, especially when they're under a very high pressure situation. How many of you have field training in interrogations? No one usually raises their hand for that one. So if they're in this position of power where they know how to trap you, and you're in this position without power where you don't know how to respond, why would you
finish your sentence.
Yeah, why would you want to make a statement that could ultimately be used against you? What were you going to ask?
Do you know of training for the reverse? Are there people out there offering training to organizations or demonstrators or whatever in the reverse, how to resist the Fifth Amendment? Or, okay, simple as that.
Simple as that. Yeah.
If I could just throw something out there about that, the way I had it explained to me that I thought was really appropriate is, there's a certain set of facts. They have this evidence, they know this. And any word that you say is, so your attorney's eventually going to look at that evidence and figure out how that can be presented in court, right? Every word that you say, you're closing a door that your attorney can go through. You're making it impossible to go this direction. You say something else, you can't go this direction. So nothing you say is going to help in any way. You're just limiting possibilities. And you're not going to talk yourself out of the situation. If they have enough evidence to arrest you, they're going to arrest you. If they don't, they're not. You're not going to say anything where they're going to go, well, we were going to arrest you, but since you said that, you can get out of here. The die's already cast at that point, and you can't help yourself by saying something.
Got it.
I completely agree with that. I would put this in the category of embracing delayed gratification. If you have information that would be exculpatory for you, if it would tend to prove that you're not guilty of the crime that you're accused of, then you'll have an opportunity later on through your lawyer to present it, but you can really limit yourself or say things that could hurt you if you try to explain a situation to a cop. Some examples are, you could place yourself at the scene of a crime. Yeah, I was there, but I'm not the one who spray painted. Well, maybe they didn't even know that you were there, and now they told you. Or if it's an assault, yeah, I don't like the guy, but I would never actually, hurt him. You've just demonstrated a motive. Sometimes people just admit to conduct. I had a case where my client was at an animal rights protest at a circus, and someone came up and blew smoke in her face, and like a counter protester. And so she hit her. And right afterwards, she wrote a police statement saying, yes, I hit her, but she deserved it. She blew smoke in my face first. Well, what if the cop didn't actually see her hit the other person? What if he was just relying on what the smoking person had said? She's just provided evidence that she did. So there's nothing that you can say that's going to help you at that point. I think it's a lot more helpful to allow your attorney to filter this information through to the prosecutor at a appropriate juncture. Something that we started to go through with Darius is there's going to be a lot of pressure that the police put on you to get you to make a statement. Why? because it makes their job a lot easier. What could be better than you signing a confession for them? It really prevents them from having to do a whole lot of detective work. And so they'll say things to you like, if you just sign this form, you can go home tonight. Don't sign the form. You know, delay the gratification. We know what happened anyway. If you just confess, we'll make it easier for you. No, they won't. They might say, your friend already confessed anyway. Well, good for them if it's true, and it probably isn't. And then something they love to say is, if you cooperate with us, then we can help you out too. And something that they often offer to do in that context is, if you cooperate with us, we will tell the prosecutor and we'll tell the judge that you cooperated. Yes, they will. What they will say is, we asked him, did he do it? And he said, yes. That's how they're going to explain your cooperation to the judge. It's never going to be in a way that's helpful to you. It's always going to be in a way that harms you. Another thing is that sometimes you really don't know what's potentially harmful and what's not potentially harmful. A question I get asked a lot is, I don't have anything to hide. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know anything about the crime. Why can't I just say I don't know anything? Well, sometimes you don't know what it is you know and you don't know. Let's say you were at a protest and there was some act of vandalism. A window gets smashed or someone puts up some spray paint somewhere and you don't know about it. And a cop comes up to you and they're like, hey, could you just tell me that guy's name and that guy's name and that guy's name? And you figure, well, you know, what harm would it do? He just wants to know what these people's names are, and we're just at a protest and it's legal, so how could that hurt? Well, you don't know. Probably if a cop is asking you for information, it's because they want to use it against somebody, not just because they have like a, you know, they're writing a dissertation about names and they're interested in them or anything like that. Another thing is that once you start answering questions, it becomes very difficult to stop answering questions. You know, you do the easy stuff. What's your name? Where are you coming from? What'd you do tonight? And then they'll start asking you, what about that guy? Or something else that makes you uncomfortable. And you say, oh, I don't want to answer that one. Well, what's the matter? I mean, I thought we were friends. We were just hanging out and talking, and you know, it seemed like everything was going well, and now you're acting so suspicious and you don't want to answer my questions. So why put yourself in a position where you're setting up that scenario where something that you don't want to answer gets asked? So, sounds like this is all very high pressure. How do you make it stop?
I don't know if you're going to touch on this, so I just point at it. Additionally, a lot of people are naive. They think that if they ask a cop a question, because they're supposed to be upholding the law, that they won't lie. Actually, the police are not only permitted to lie to a suspect, but they're encouraged to lie to them. So you can't say like, well, are you the man? And then rely on the undercover cop's word, and say no, like, oh, okay, so this is, the police are allowed under the law to lie to a suspect.
Absolutely, including questions about your rights. Like, do I have to consent to a search? Do I have to answer your questions? They might say yes. It's likely that they'll tell you that they already know things that they don't know. I think we can assume that a large amount of information that you get from a police officer is going to be inaccurate. So, how do you stop these pressure tactics? If you're at the police station and they're just hitting you with a barrage of questions and you feel very intimidated by it, what's the magic phrase that you can say to the police officer to get them to stop?
Shut the fuck up.
No.
No.
Absolutely. Once you have asserted your Fifth Amendment right, and you say, I wish to remain silent, I want to see a lawyer, by law, they are no longer allowed to ask you any more questions. which takes all of the stress off of you. All that pressure of, the different tactics and, oh, we know this, etc., it all goes away. And then you can feel free to carry on with your plan of shutting the fuck up. Another bit of advice is don't talk to other people about your case too, because you really don't know who you can trust, especially if you get arrested and you are spending time in jail. The people around you might already be informants or undercover officers, or they might be people who become interested in sharing information with cops once they learn something that's potentially juicy. Don't talk about your case on the phone. The phones are monitored. Don't send letters to your friends explaining what happened, because letters from jail are monitored. If you have stuff to get off your chest, drunk dial your ex, but save conversations for your case for talking with your lawyer.
Ma'am?
Yes.
I've been in jail,
Mm-hmm.
and but a lot of good people have too. What people need to understand is you can't even appear to be looking like you're talking about your case to somebody, because there's people that are desperate. They might be looking at 10 or 20 years. Not only might they repeat what you told them, but they might just take the opportunity to lie about what you told them to try to get themselves a better deal. So not only do you not want to talk to anybody about your case, you don't want to look like you're talking about your case either.
Yeah.
It's a real snake bit. Yeah.
I agree, especially where I practice most is the federal system, and that's a system that's basically built on snitching. The way to get yourself out of a mandatory minimum or an otherwise very long sentence, pretty much the only way in a lot of circumstances, is to find some information that you can provide about other people. And you definitely don't want to give the opportunity to these people who are staring down the barrel of decades in prison the opportunity to decrease the length of their sentence by providing information about you. So I'll move on now from the Fifth Amendment, protecting your right to silence, to the Fourth Amendment, which protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures. And we'll talk about searches first. In most cases, there's some exceptions, but in most cases, there's two ways that cops can get the legal authority to search things like your house, your car, your backpack, your pockets. Number one is they can get a search warrant, which is an order from the court where they say they have to lay out the facts for the reason why they think that you have contraband in a particular place. And the other way is consent. If you say, yeah, go ahead, search my car, house, backpack, purse, pockets, don't do that. I can't even tell you how many times I've worked on a criminal case where someone who knows that they're guilty and knows that they have contraband somewhere just consents to a search for reasons that I will never understand. If you have pot in your pocket and you know it, why are you going to say yes, but people do anyway? I think that there's just a lot of pressure, or they think that if they say, oh sure, I have nothing to hide, that maybe the search won't actually happen. Or maybe the cops will say, you could consent, or I could go get a warrant, and they figure, well, I'll just have to stand here for hours and wait for them to get a warrant, and then they're going to search anyway, so why don't I just make this easy for myself? And that goes back to the delayed gratification principle that we've been talking about, that if cops could get a warrant to search your house, do you think that they would come and knock on your door and ask you, pretty please, first? No, they're asking you for your consent because they know that they're not going to be able to obtain this evidence from you any other way. So just say no. It can be difficult if a cop lays on those pressure tactics of, why? You have something to hide in there? You've been smoking some reefer before you came out tonight? You know, just suck it up and say, I do not consent to a search. And that's the second keyword that will help you out a lot, is if a cop wants to, you know, after a protest, hey, could I just take a look in the trunk of your car? Say no. You have nothing to lose by saying no to a cop. If you say no to a cop when you don't want to consent to a search, they can't use that as probable cause to get a search warrant. And sometimes you just don't know what you have in your car or your backpack or your purse until someone's pulling it out and confronting you with it. For example, you don't have a right to right against searches if you're at a border. And one time I was driving up to Canada and I was going for perfectly legal reasons. I had absolutely no intention of committing any crimes when I got to Canada. And I thought that my car had nothing suspicious in it, but I was pulled over for secondary inspection and they took my car apart, and I was pretty surprised and uncomfortable by what they ended up finding in there. Sometimes you just don't remember. I had a letter from a political prisoner that I was using as a bookmark. I had an old zine that someone had stashed in a pocket in the backseat of the car called Evasion, that's primarily about shoplifting and other scams, which doesn't look very good. If they searched my computer, they probably would have found that I had visited websites that talked about crimes. For example, I was interested in the animal liberation movement, and I would go to websites like directaction.info, and you know, none of that stuff looks good when you're confronted by law enforcement with it. So why give them the opportunity to ask you, so you're interested in lockpicking, huh? That's interesting. Just say no. There are some exceptions. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I think the question you're asking is that if you're not able to speak, how do you go about not consenting to a search? Oh, what's stopping them? So is your question, what's stopping the police from just searching you? Okay. So I'd like to hear details about your suggestion not to consent to a search. What's stopping them? I'm mute because of an old head injury. During my arrest on the night of June 1st, 2011, the arresting officers pinned me to the ground, went through my pockets, and read all my notes and scraps, and raided my shoulder bag. Okay, very good question, and that brings us to exceptions to the Fourth Amendment. There are some times, they're infrequent, when the police are allowed to search you without your consent and without a search warrant. One is if you're just stopped on the street and they have a suspicion that you committed a crime, not quite to the point where they could arrest you for it, but to the point where they think that you might have done something, then they're allowed to do what you might have heard of as a stop and frisk. It's also called a Terry stop. And all they're allowed to do at that point is just pat you down, and they're looking for what they call hards and sharps, or guns or knives. And then, if they decide that there is enough probable cause to actually arrest you, then they are allowed to search you. And at that point, they can search you, they call it to the skin. So they can strip search, they can go through your pockets. If you have something that you've brought with you to a protest, say it's your backpack or your shoulder bag or your purse, that all becomes fair game. It's called a search incident to arrest. And it's a very good point that you brought up, that since police are allowed to, and sometimes they'll say they have probable cause when what they really want to do is search you, but they are allowed to search you if you've been arrested. And so if you're putting yourself in a potentially high-risk situation, such as going to a protest, be careful about what you have with you, because some things that police officers would really like to have might include your address book or your day planner. You certainly don't want to bring a weapon with you. You don't want to have drug paraphernalia for you. Your slingshot organizer, they are going to go through it. They're going to make photocopies of everything that's in there. And so if you know that you're in a situation where you could potentially get arrested, you really don't want to have any of that stuff with you. I know it's very difficult to leave your house without certain things, whether it's your planner or your phone. I know I feel very naked without my phone, and Darius will probably tell you that I spend more time with the phone than I do with the cats. But you know, if you're in a high-risk situation, maybe you just want to write a phone number of a lawyer or someone who can provide support for you on your arm, and leave that stuff at home.
What if the police have detained you, but they haven't arrested you? How far are they allowed to carry their search?
Very good question. That was what I was going to get to next, which is that if you're stopped on the street, let's say you're at a protest and someone just comes up and says, "Hey, can I talk to you for a while?"
Say no.
Say no. If you're dealing with a cop, the phrase I would use is, am I being detained or am I free to leave? If the cop says you're free to leave, walk away from him. Don't answer any questions. You don't have to. The reason why a cop would say that you're not free to leave is if they have suspicion that you've committed a crime. Not quite enough to bring you down to the station yet, but there's some possibility that you've committed a crime. Then that gets you to this Terry stop stage where they can just pat you down for weapons. But let's say they feel a cigarette packet in your pocket. Well, there's not a gun or a knife in your cigarette packet, and they cannot open that up and start looking through things.
But they can't be going like through my briefcase or my wallet and looking at all my credit cards and.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
At that point, when you're just being detained, then all they can do is a pat down for weapons. And if they do say you're not free to leave, you are being detained, you have the right to ask why, and they have to tell you that there's an investigation into unlawful activity. If they say, I just want to chat with you, they might not want to answer the question directly, because then they'll be confronted with the fact that, no, there's no reasonable suspicion against you, I'm just trying to pressure you. If they try to do the pressure tactics of like, why don't you want to talk to me? I just want to get to know you. I'm just a community police officer trying to introduce myself to people who come out to these protests. That's not, yes, you're being detained. And you should feel free to keep pursuing them in that direction until they either tell you that you're free to leave or tell you the reason why you're being detained.
If they come to your door, your house,
Mhm.
and they knock,
Mm-hmm.
and they ask if they can come in to talk to you, what should you say or do and why?
What do you think you should do?
Well, I know, but I'm just going to let you spell it, but I would, if I'd opened the door, which I might not, if I see a cop on my porch, I might just not open the door or answer the door at all. But if I did answer the door, I would step outside, I'd lock the door and I'd pull it to behind me so that the cop couldn't arrest me inside my house and then search the house, incident as they're permitted to do to an arrest.
Yeah, very good advice. If the cops come to your house and they say they want to chat, you don't have any obligation to chat with them. You have no obligation to let them inside your house. If they want to look around, they can go get a warrant if they actually have a basis for getting a warrant. I think I would do exactly what you said. I would either step outside and lock the door behind me so that there's no issue about whether you've consented to let them in the house, or if you have one of those chain locks where you can chain it up and then just open the door a couple inches, you can open it up, tell them that you're not interested in talking with them, and send them along their merry way.
Well, why answer the door at all if you know there's a cop on the door, on the porch?
And you could not do that, but, well, two things. The first is that if you're being evasive, that could be something that could be used as probable cause against you if you're ultimately being charged with a crime.
Not answering the door?
So let's say that they're doing surveillance and they have someone sitting outside in a pizza delivery car, and they know when you're actually coming and going, and they knock on the door and you don't answer. They might put in their certification for probable cause. We were watching, we knew that he was home, and he chose not to answer. And second, they might keep coming back, and at some point you might just have to deal with the fact that they want to try to talk to you. So why not just get it out of the way and say, thanks for stopping by, I'm not interested in talking with you, I'm going to ask you to leave. And don't worry about hurting their feelings. They deal with this all the time. They're cops. I don't know if they even have feelings, honestly, but don't feel like you have to be polite to the point where you're sacrificing your rights. Does someone have a question?
Yes, I live in a small town right near here, and sometimes when the paramedics call on somebody, a cop goes in with them, just for no real reason, just probably because they have nothing better to do. It's a small town. But then they sort of poke around. Can you, or should you say, the paramedic's okay, but you're not here?
It's absolutely your right to do that.
Okay. And the second question, unrelated but another question. What about if it's a federal officer of some sort as opposed to a local police officer?
Same rights.
Okay.
Yeah, you still just tell them to go kick rocks.
I would be more polite than that.
Yeah, absolutely. If they do have a search warrant, ask to see it before they come inside your house. Take note of what it is that the search warrant allows them to search and what it allows them to seize. If it's a search warrant looking for, let's say, electronic evidence, then they have no business poking through your drawers or your fridge or your freezer or anything like that. They're looking for your computer, so, get out of my underwear drawer. People ask, like, if they come with a warrant, I don't like cops, I don't want to let them in. Should I not answer the door? Should I just let them, should I not let them in? And, if they want to serve the search warrant, they could escalate it to the point of using a battering ram to take down your door if you don't open it voluntarily. I have cats. I don't want my cats to run away, so I really don't want to have a broken door, because that would mean that I would probably spend the rest of the night looking around my neighborhood for Mr. Bear, which would be very distressing to me. But it's your decision to make if you feel so strongly about not letting a police officer into your house, even if they have a search warrant, that you don't want to answer the door for them. If you're home when they're searching through your house, I would make a note, just make a point of saying to them, I'm not consenting to this search. I'm letting you into the house pursuant to your search warrant, but I do not consent to a search. And that way, if later on there's some reason for challenging the search warrant, if it wasn't based on good probable cause or something like that, then they won't say, oh, well, he let me go through anyway. Don't let them take any more than what the court order is already authorizing them to do.
When they come in with a warrant, my experience is that they won't let you watch them search. Do you have the right to be present when they search, or do they have the right to exclude you from watching them search?
It's not really clear. I don't think that there's any Supreme Court precedent that specifically talks about that. I think what they will often say is that it's a threat to officer safety, or that you're obstructing their investigation by hanging over their shoulder. I think sometimes if you're polite and unobtrusive, they'll let you stand in the room. Not necessarily. Sometimes you could be very polite and unobtrusive and they'll still send you out into your backyard. I haven't seen a case that said that they're required to let you watch. They are required to give you an inventory of everything that they've taken from you.
And before they leave